Okay, cool. Well, thank you for making time. I appreciate it. And yeah, I think maybe to start, can I get a little bit more about your background? I understand that you have like a circus and aerial performance background before moving into media arts?
Yeah, so I'm an artist working at the intersection of the physical body and computation. I have a background in contemporary circus, and my apparatuses were um, aerial silks and aerial rope, and also in somatic practice. I have a long background in both yoga asana and meditation practice, and um, and then on this sort of other side of things, I have a background in experimental software programming and in software design as well, and also in communications design. So I bring all of that together in my practice, making interactive performances and installations. And in my work, I'm really thinking about centering the human body in the conversation with technology, really kind of making sure that we don't forget the part of us that's outside of the webcam,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
You find that like past impacts like the work that you're doing in front of a screen.
Yeah, if it's okay, I might give the long answer there because I
Yeah.
think the way I came into the work really informs the way I come into my technology and my relationship there. And the way I came into the work is actually because in my early adulthood, I was in a traumatic car accident. Um, at the time, I ended up in bed for several months, and I have a partially reconstructed skull and trauma in my back and hips as a result of it. And it was so after spending several months in bed, in order to rehabilitate my back and neck and to just get that movement back, I started practicing yoga. Um, and so that's actually where my yoga practice started. It was really as a way to get back into my body after not being in my body for such a long time and just kind of being in bed for a summer at a young age. And after that, I went to college. I started my first desk job and I found myself back in medical care. And this time it was because being at a computer for extended times was actually exacerbating the trauma in my back and hips from the accident to the point that I woke up one day and I could barely walk. It was quite severe. And it's interesting because I remember at the time thinking to myself, oh, it's really weird that my computer would be hurting me. And I remember even saying the same thing to my doctor at the time, just being like, wait, what? Like, isn't ergonomics like a thing? Isn't that just like in there? And it feels really naive, but I think, it's also what we're told to believe, right? It's like, it's the story that we're given that our technology is, just making our lives better. And, I think the reality is, and digging into it, of course, I started to realize that hardware and software are not necessarily um, made with my well-being in mind, right? My physical well-being, my mental well-being, my social well-being, right? And so it was digging into this after that experience with my technology and how it was impacting me physically that got me into thinking about the relationship between technology and my body and just me as a human. And so that's really what started pushing me into learning more about computers, learning how to program them, learning how to kind of break them and play around with them and what they can do, to kind of think a little bit about outside the box about how they work. And then eventually I went back to graduate school to study this intersection of the physical body and computation to really think about how we're designing our computational systems and, our hardware and our software. Um, you know, how I can comment on it, but also how I can think about ways that, ways of modeling a relationship that I want to have with technology or how I want to see technology um, showing up in this relationship, right, with me.
Mm.
Um, and so when I think then this is why I said this is the long answer to your question about, then how is that physical background showing up? I think all the time that my physical practice, which started with rehabilitation, right? And my practice came from trauma, um, both my yoga practice and then eventually my circus training as well. they both came from wanting to be back in my body, to wanting to understand how I could push the limits of my body, both to explore it and to enjoy it, right? Um, and so all of that then comes into my relationship with technology, because when I'm coming into my relationship with my computer, when I'm thinking about a new work, when I'm programming something or designing it, I'm really thinking about how my body can push this platform, right? How can I show up in this relationship with technology, and how can the technology come into it as well, so that we can be pushing ourselves forward together in an interesting, creative way, right? Something that is like moving us forward, making something bigger, um, something that is not traumatizing us, but is actually doing the opposite, right? That is actually like uplifting us, that is pushing us, like I said, forward creatively, socially, right? So this is, I think, really where that is showing up in my work, is in pushing that relationship to be different, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good answer. I understand why you took the long answer to explain that. Yeah, and that's such a good point about like computer systems that we use don't really think of us and our own health and well-being. They're very agnostic in that way. It's a very like I guess like libertarian technology in that way. It's kind of like you figure out what your relationship to this thing is. You figure out your own ways of comfort, but it's not the machine itself is not going to make any affordances to ensure your own comfort. And that definitely echoes like my experience with computers as well. Um, so for Lossy, that term that's like it's a technical term, and it describes like that compression that permanently discards like data. When did you realize that that was like going to be a useful way of thinking about it? I saw that word had shown up, I think, in a previous piece. Like that was at the name of the piece, but you would, I think it kind of, I could see some of the through lines there, like, oh, that language of like what is lost and what is gained, like through that process of compression. When did you show up there and realize that, hey, that was going to be an interesting thing to tackle with your, with this project?
Yeah, well, if it's okay, first, I just want to go back to the thought of technology as agnostic, actually,
Yeah.
because the way that I feel about it is, um, I actually feel technology is quite opinionated, because it carries the weight of its designers and programmers. And so it's interesting, actually, in the work that I'm creating now, not Lossy, but a newer work, I actually am programming myself in as the programmer, because I think it's so important for us to remember that our technology is coming from other humans who are creating it in the way that they want to create it to interact with you, right? So it's a human to human connection through an intermediary, right? But in the way that I come into my relationship with hardware and software, I'm always thinking of it as actually like in the relationship with the people who built it, if that makes any sense, and something that's quite opinionated and could be much different if it were programmed differently, if that
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
sense.
No, it does. I think maybe apathetic is maybe a better way to describe it, or just like
Yeah.
uncaring, But yeah,
Yes,
agnostic
I
maybe
think
is,
I think that's yeah, exactly. Apathetic is perfect. It's like,
yeah,
yeah, you're like, you really didn't think about it. I mean, I guess, yeah, it's like how could you not have realized that? I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just, there are a lot of these moments where you're listening to Mark Zuckerberg talk to Congress, and you're like, how could you? Anyway,
yeah, yeah. How
I
could you
could
not
I could
foresee that?
tangent here, but I won't. Um, but yeah, so I'll come back to Lossy. I mean, I guess there's a short, maybe funny story about how Lossy became the name of this piece. So Lossy is part of a series of work that I've been working on for the past 5 years now, what I've now termed my capture series. And the capture series is uh, about, it's really investigating and creating work around the idea of what it means to live through capture. So, for hundreds of thousands of years, humans experienced the world through our physical bodies, right? Our relationships with individuals, our relationships with ourselves, our relationships with our environments. It was all through the physical body, right? And just in the past couple of decades, we now have this digital extension, which is very real. And it is deeply impacting, I think, what it means to experience ourselves and to experience our environments and other humans, and non-human entities, right? And and so in my mind, this is capture, right? We're living through capture. We're living through these versions of ourselves that are created out of some type of data. And so this is sort of the capture series, which was made to explore this. And so I guess the funny thing about Lossy is I had kept writing about this piece Lossy, which had a couple of different names as I was working on it. And every time I would have a non-technical person read it, to give me feedback, they would edit out the term Lossy because they didn't know what it meant and they thought it was confusing or whatever. And it was funny because I love the term Lossy. Like I've always just thought it was like so descriptive and so beautiful. Actually, it's like, I don't know. I think it's a lovely word. And so it was so weird to me, I guess, because I was like, it makes so much sense. Even if you don't know what it means, it's like Lossy. And anyway, it was, the fourth or fifth time it had gotten edited out. And finally I was just like, no, we're just putting this in the title and then no one will edit it out ever again. And so that's how it became named Lossy. But the sort of the bigger theme of loss, it comes from this idea of thinking about what it means to live through capture. And, it started during the pandemic, seeing my, not just friends, but seeing actually avant-garde performance and interactive performance. These incredible movers who, if you think about, I was based in Brooklyn at the time, so you go to a avant-garde circus show in Brooklyn, you have, performance all around you. You have bodies and lights. And I mean, it's incredible, right? It's like fully interactive. And in the pandemic, all of a sudden, all of that was coming behind like a 16:9 webcam and oftentimes not a very good one on a poor feed, And so you're like, oh gosh, we can do better than this, right? And so this is what's got me thinking like, okay, what does it mean to be captured? What is capture? And I started actually at the time, I wanted to go back to some earlier 3D scanning work that I had been doing. And that got me thinking about sculpture and figurative sculpture. And so I started going back and sort of, I spent about a year researching figurative sculpture and classical sculpture up into contemporary. And it was very informative and just thinking about how much it impacts us to create our form outside of ourselves, right? And just this relationship between sort of the ideal or the vision that we create, that we externally create. And then I come back, as I was reading, I came back to this one sculpture that I had actually encountered in my interaction design research years before when I was working at Adobe and as a experienced designer, software designer there. And the sculpture is called Norma. And she was created in the 1940s by a gynecologist. He created the sculpture out of the averaged measurements of 15,000 white women, I believe aged 21 to 26. So he took all of their measurements, averaged them all together, and then created the sculpture called Norma. And then Norma was then put in doctor's offices and medical schools. She was in Time magazine. She was like the perfect female body. And then they had this Miss Norma competition. And they had women from around the United States were able to send in their measurements to see who was the perfect American woman. And so thousands of women send in their measurements. And of course, no one adds up. Like no one makes it. No one is the perfect woman, it turns out. There was one woman, Martha Skidmore, who I think matched 3 or almost matched 3 of the 9 measurements. So she was almost there, but still not perfect. And so they gave her the award. But then the interesting thing at the time is that the story about this then became not like, oh, this is weird science, or like, oh, haha, we did, this ridiculous thing. It was, no one is adding up to the perfect ideal. There is a crisis in American women's health, right? And so it got thrown back on the women that their bodies were not adding up to what they should. And so I remember reading about this at the time and thinking like, yes, this is so flagrant, right? But then coming from a software design background, I know that this is still how we design hardware and software. We design for the center of the bell curve, right? We design in persona design. So like sort of like personas, but not real people. It's sort of these like groups of humans. We design for, the average height ranges, but not for anybody outside of it, for the average hand sizes and not for any, right? Everything still falls within this. And so as I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about, okay, during the pandemic, we had this moment that has continued, right? Where we were full throttle into living through our digital representations. I just began to think like, wow, if we're all pushing ourselves into these forms that are created right at the center of the bell curve, what are we shaving away, right? And so that's where the capture series came from. It's been this exploration of the center of the bell curve and what it means, and like playing with averaging, actually. And so the initial piece in the series is actually called Maquette, and it's a performance that's all based on averaging. But then Lossy actually comes out of the first scene of Maquette, which is set in the sculpture garden. It's a duet between two women, Francoise and Nikki. Francoise Feringer and Nikki Ortiz, and they're in duet, and they're creating their own Norma. They move together, and on screen they're being blended together into this average sculpture. Their movements are totally lost within each other. And so what I'm playing with in the piece is there's sort of this like horror of, not being able to be yourself. But then there's also this beauty that comes out of like, what if we know that we're losing part of ourselves? What if we focus on what's actually different and what we can gain, right? And so then the piece really becomes about what is that sort of transcendence of digital, right? Like what are the affordances of digital that are not physical? So instead of like I think at the time when the metaverse was very big, we were seeing a lot of like, let's recreate the entire town of whatever. Let's create this entire building, or like, let's make this avatar that looks exactly like me, right? And it's just like, we're never going to be able to replicate, nor should we, the physical world and digital. What if we play with what digital can do and have fun with that and build on those affordances? And so that's really what the piece is about. Sorry, that's sort of the background of it. And then maybe I can pause there and see if, otherwise I can just kind of jump into what Lossy itself is about.
Yeah. That was my next question was, walking. I've watched the videos, but, if you could see like physically, spatially, just walk through that experience.
Yeah, great. So Lossy then, coming out of Maquette, Lossy is a walkthrough interactive installation featuring 3 sculptures that each are made from a fraction of a second of motion captured contemporary circus duet. So the piece is really holding, it's these like, just these tiny little moments that you would never notice almost in real life. And it's taken these fractions of a second, 3 of them, and it's just suspending them in time, and it just loops and loops and loops, and you're really engulfed in this sort of suspension of time in the piece. And so the piece, when you walk in, it's a 3-sided room, or a 3-sided installation, and you have 3 animations playing, left, back, and right. And then the animations have in front of them a plinth with a sculpture on top. And when you come into the installation, you're given a headset to wear, a motion tracked headset. And so the media that's there is on the 3 screens, you're seeing animations, game engine animations from Unreal Engine of 3 sculptures that were made from these 3 split seconds of motion captured duet. And those sculptures are animated over time. So you're seeing those animations. And then in front of each sculpture, you have a 3D print of the avatars, so the photogrammetry avatars of the 2 performers in the position that created the sculpture behind them. and those are lit. And then on the headphones, you're walking through a spatial audioscape, and you're hearing 3 poems that I've written. Each poem, so there's 3 poems, one for each sculpture. And then each of those has an audioscape. And then each audioscape is then broken up into 6 pieces. And then there's an entry soundscape as well. So within the space, you walk through 24 different sounds. And as you walk through the space, you are being motion tracked. So you have a motion tracker on top of your headset. You're motion tracked, and you essentially are mixing the sound as you walk through the space with your movement.
Okay.
And then the piece is ongoing. It just sort of loops and loops and loops and loops. So there's no real beginning or end. When people come into the space, I introduce it as a memorial to the physical body in the age of the digital body. And it's a memorial is a space that you come and you spend the time that you want with it. And so people come in and out as they wish.
Like I'm thinking about like capture technologies, so you have a camera, and the camera records a still, a still image of like a moment in time in 2D. And you video, which records like a moving image. So multiple images stitched together, but still on a flat surface. And then you have photogrammetry, which kind of can capture a single moment in time. And then you have kind of what you're doing, which kind of puts these individual moments like into context. I think my question for you is, what is like, what are the things that are like lost or gained between that kind of like that photogrammetry, that 3D image, and the movie, like that, the sculpture that you're building of the composite of all of these different images? Like what's with that gap between those two things? What kind of lives in that space between those two items?
Well, I think the thing that we lose is we lose vitality, right? And I think this is the point for me of the work and why I keep pushing it, is because I think that we've become so used to identifying with our photos and our videos, these things that sort of almost look like us, that we have started to sort of replace our vitality with that, right? With our captures. And to me, I think that's very scary. Right, that like we stop being present in our own lives because we start identifying so much with the vision, right? So I think that's what we lose. But I think by continuing to play with the different forms of capture and kind of passing in and out of different capture methods, I think we gain something. I don't know. For me, I think we gain another dimension we sort of add a dimension onto what it looks like or feels like to be human, right? I think all art kind of gives us another view, right? It allows us to look from over here instead of over here on ourselves. And it adds to our vision of what we can be or what we're capable of. And so to me, I think this is, and I think this is I think this is why I'm attracted. I think it's why a lot of people are attracted to digital, because it's so powerful, right? You can just create these things that are just, it takes you or it takes a thing and it just like it can really add a layer that is just gorgeous. And it really adds to your appreciation of what a thing can be. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote a little bit about this film Dry Leaf that came out. I guess it's not out yet. I was reading some early reviews by Alexander Koberizzi, and it's filmed on like Sony Ericsson phone camera from like 20 years ago, and so it's like deliberately like low resolution. And I was reviewing the New York Review of Books, and it's interesting. Like I do think there's maybe we've kind of come out the other end where there's like maybe more interest in representational digital images, as opposed to having like we're more comfortable with the idea or exploring those kind of like in between spaces, and also like a growing literacy that there's a continuum of digital image. It's not just like up and to the right, like everything needs to be like better, 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 but that there are other ways to sort of experience what we see on screen, which I think is, I don't know, I just feel like there's a contemporary, particularly with younger people, that there's like an interest or like also an interest in this idea of like having things gained and lost like through digital compression that I think I didn't grow up with. It was like I wanted everything to be as realistic as possible. So I feel like, I don't know, there's like an interesting thing that's happening with literacy and how we understand the relationship between like still moving 3D and I guess 4D, I suppose for some of your work, like these 3D images moving through time. So yeah.
Well,
Uh,
and actually, I feel like AI slop is like a very good example of what you're talking
mhm,
about, right? It's just like there's no, like it becomes very fun, right? When you stop
right.
trying to make it real,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, one of the refrains in the piece is, so it goes. It's interesting. I just finished Slaughterhouse Five this year. I read it in high school and then read it again this year, actually. I was curious about Vonnegut, your relationship to Vonnegut, and I believe there's some like emotional resonance for that line for you. And yeah, just tell me a little bit about like the echo of Vonnegut as it kind of rings through some of the spoken words in this piece.
Yeah, thank you. So, actually, as I was creating this piece, so when I was originally creating these sculptures, and it was originally an augmented reality piece that was meant and was shown in an exhibition on the Strand Aldwych, just outside of Somerset House in central London. Um, and as I was creating the work, my mom passed away, and I was very close with my mother, so much so that and as she was dying, I had my cheek on her cheek as she exhaled her last breath, and it was, I think, this moment of loss, of corporeal loss, right, and really just being able to feel that loss. I mean, really feeling someone leave the room, and just being so in touch with at the moment of what a body is and how our own bodies extend so much actually through the bodies of others. Not just physically how we come from other people, but that's a big part of it, but also just how we identify so much through other people, right? Like, I could have never imagined the world without my mother would feel so empty, but it does. It's like I've lost an appendage, right? And I think for anyone who has lost someone who's very close to them, they realize they're not just losing that person, but they lose a part of themselves, right? And so as I was coming into this work, I was feeling this tremendous loss. And so the work itself is, Lossy is about this idea of losing what it means to be purely physical, right? It's losing the physical body in the age of the digital body. But then it also is wrapping in this loss of that I had just experienced with losing my mother. And so when I was writing the poems, I wrote in this refrain, "So it goes." And "So it goes" is used by Kurt Vonnegut in the book Slaughterhouse-Five. He uses it in a couple of different ways. He uses it as a transition. And so Slaughterhouse-Five is about World War II. And he's, as he's writing, sort of every time something awful or unfathomable happens, he just uses "so it goes." He just says "so it goes" and ... and then sort of like line break, next topic, right? And I think for me, it really encapsulated this feeling of like, there are just no words, but it's interesting because there's a feeling, right? It's something that you can feel and that you can experience, but you can't express it in words. And I think this term "so it goes" really encapsulates that experience of just like, so it goes. He also uses it interestingly as what we call memento mori, so like a reminder of the inevitability of death, right? And so, and I think that's very interesting because as I was reflecting on this piece and this term "so it goes," it's very interesting to me that we can die physically, but we cannot die digitally. I mean, eventually the data centers maybe will all shut down. We'll see. But it's interesting, right? It's like my mom's Facebook account was still up and going, it's like, and I don't know, it's a very interesting thing, right? The sort of physical versus the digital death. But then, so then the other part of this is then, so I wrote the poems, but I worked with the sound artist Matt McCorkle on the soundscapes. And as we were talking about them, I explained to him that, these poems are holding a lot of weight for me right now. And I explained the story of my mother. And he had also recently lost his father. He had lost a parent and really understood the feeling, and said like, okay, I can bring that emotion to this piece. And so in the work, I think in these compositions that he's written, he's brought in this deep sense of emotional longing and loss, which to me, and I guess knowing it, it feels very powerful. And I think he did an incredible job with relaying the emotional weight of what it means to lose a body.
Yeah. It's interesting with that refrain. It's also for for in Slaughterhouse Five, it's like sort of used as a it's a bit of a refusal, right? Like he can't reflect on what's actually happened, and so he defaults to this language that both encompasses kind of like the horrors of Dresden, but at the same time, it is also a book about like a form of, you just say, a failure to not personal failure on his part, but just he's not able to like process. And so it was, I think with your work, like also like this is your way of like processing these things that are happening to you in a way that that none of the characters in Slaughterhouse Five are really able to process World War II. So it just gets like stuff. It's kind of like, so it goes, it gets stuffed inside, and it comes out in all of these other crazy ways. And he's time traveling in his mind, and he's time traveling in his mind, and he cheats on his wife, and he's calling old friends. He gets drunk on the phone and calls old friends. So yeah, it's interesting. It's like you use kind of like you're finding a new use for, I think, for this phrase to both capture some of the horror, but or some of the, I don't know, there's something more contemplative about the way that you're using it, as opposed to like the way it reflects the lives of the characters in the book.
Well, yes, and I would also say that so the poems themselves actually are reflecting on our relationship to technology. And so one of them is talking about the surveilled body. One of them is talking about the way that we contort our bodies for our technology, or the way that we shape ourselves for our technology, or in service of our technology. And the other one is about the way that we edit away the things that make us human, right? So it's like you can just brush that off, even that out.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think that there is also in the So It Goes, there's definitely like, to me, it is reflecting a little bit on the horror of what it means to stop being physical, right? To stop
Yeah,
being human. And I think, as this piece has gone on, I've been reflecting on like, I'm like a millennial, like late millennial. So I'm the last generation to have been, to be a non-digital native, even though I'm like a digital native. You know what I mean? I'm like that weird cusp, but definitely the last people to have been sort of come into the world without the internet, right? And smartphones. And it's really interesting because I feel for me, I'm holding space and mourning actually for this way that we have been and who we have been, right? I think that there is like, and to me, there is some trauma in that, right? And so I think it's certainly not, they're different. They're different situations, certainly Slaughterhouse Five and the moment that we're in. But I think, I don't know, I guess in also within sort of the socio-political environment that we're in, it's very easy to move forward, to envision this being the beginning of the sort of sci-fi horror movie, right? And
yeah,
so I think that the Lossy is holding some of that of like, is this the end of our corporeal freedom, right?
yeah. Yeah, there's the so it goes is carrying a lot. Like it is
Yes.
the right to be forgotten. It's this pre-internet. I'm a customer as well, and so yeah, there's like these experiences that I distinctly remember, and have been able to watch the development of the internet for better and for worse over the last, since dialing on the AOL or whatever 20 odd years ago, so it's like that memory is kind of gone, that was something that you could opt out of. Yeah, we don't have that ability the way that we used to. Um, um, One of the things I saw, I believe was in your artist statement, was talking about like capturing the incomplete representations um, can diminish our, sorry, the opposite. Incomplete representations can help expand rather than reduce our humanity when it's created with like care and intention. What does that mean? Like to capture a body with care and intention? Because I feel like we're, one hand, I'm like capturing taking pictures or, doing all these things every day. So what does that look like for you to kind of like, to lean into this incompleteness with the appropriate amount of like respect for what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. And, I think it's an answer that's being like written, I think, by all of us. But I think for me, it actually just comes down to so much of the time it's about the intention behind what you're doing, right? And so for me, when I'm motion capturing people, for example, it's interesting, right? For example, motion capture suits are not particularly comfortable, and they're a bit they can make moving really uncomfortable, right? So for example, for this project, I used the OptiTrack motion capture system, which is incredible, incredibly performant. It's such an incredible tool to work with, but it also means putting your performers in these suits that don't breathe. And it means putting infrared markers in places all over their body, a minimum of 41 markers. And this is, especially on like their heads, hands, feet, ankles, knees, all the places that move. So if you're thinking about contemporary circus performers who spin on their head and do handstands and do
Right.
contortion back with these types of things, right? It really limits their movement. And so I think, there's a space where this could be like, okay, put this suit on. You have to stay in it for 8 hours. You can only have your bathroom breaks now, and you have to do these things, and we don't care how they feel, right? That's one intentional way of working. And the way that I'm thinking of working is, we don't mind remaking your skeleton. Whenever you need to take a bathroom break, take it. Like, let's have fun with these dots. Let's see if we can break them. Um, you know, let's figure out the ways that you can move around them. Let's figure out if we can move the dots to places that, feel better on you and make it still work, right? We're always kind of playing around with it. But then I think there's also the like, okay, and now let's play with this and have fun. So like, ooh, here you are up on screen, and now you're made out of water, and now you're made out of water, and so is this person, and the two of you are melding together, and let's see what this can create together. Let's see what happens when you do a handstand and you do a floor split, and the two of you are water, and you're in a bubble together, and you're moving that bubble around the room together through your movement. And I think that is when it's like, oh, and yes, you can go take your bathroom break, no problem, And I think that we're like, yes, like, let's get that dot off of you. I can tell it's bothering you. We'll figure that out, right? I think that this is just the intent. It's these small things, but it is the difference of how we work, right? And for me, it's very important to be thinking about like, how can this technology do things that are fun for us, that are creative, that are adding an additional layer on top of what it means to be human, to be creative, to have agency in this relationship. How can we think of capture, right? Or surveillance, right? You have 16 cameras staring down at you, right? How can this be something that is like fun and interesting and not something that feels oppressive, right?
Right.
And so that's to me really what it's about. And I think, it's interesting, like with OptiTrack, I mean, it's a really good example. I think of like, why I make this work. OptiTrack did a feature on Maquette a couple of years back, and when they published it, I noticed it was either right before or right after they published an article of them using their systems for training people in war. So it was like very like heavy artillery and I think they had like these big guns and helmets and things. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to be next to that. And then my thought was like, no, I totally want to be next to that, because the work that I'm making is really meant to say to people, there are uses for technology that don't involve restricting us, killing people, and or just turning each of us into like an ad profile, right? Like this technology can be used for other things, many other
Right.
things that are
Right. Right.
incredibly interesting, right? It's about creating models and alternatives.
Um, yeah, it's about creating choices like that. We choose to, like, we sort of collectively choose to use these technologies to, for advertising, for the military. Like these are choices at some level, and there are other paths. There are other paths through. Mhm. Cool. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for spending time talking to me about your work. I'm curious about like what's next for Lossy, like as a project.
Yeah, so Lossy just premiered at South by Southwest, had its world premiere, and I'm now building out the tour for the fall. So I think we're kind of working on booking all of those things, but it'll hopefully be coming to a number of different festivals in the coming year, which is very exciting. Um, and then I'm actually kind of turning on to my next projects. So it's very exciting. I feel like I've been working on this capture series now for 5 years, and it felt like Lossy was really sort of it felt like I finally got to say the thing that maybe I had been trying to say all along. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It was a very good final chapter. So it
Yeah.
feels really nice to have wrapped that series of thought.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it.